This is the Russian Dynamite, Masha Slamovich.
Becca here.
This is not America's Sweetheart, Davian.
It's Billy Starks. And
the super fly guy, Trayvon Jordan.
This is the fly side flyer, Jalen Brandon.
Hardcore Princess, Jules Malone.
Hi there, this is the Bubblegum Princess, Alexia Nicole.
This is the Brazilian Wonder Woman, Christy Jane.
This is the baddest black belt, Chennai Kai.
This is Kid Bandit.
The smash hit, Joel Bateman.
This is Robin Renegade.
Cody Hawk.
Brutal Bob Evans. And you are listening to Wrestling with Entertainment, one of my favorite podcasts in the whole wide world.
Hi everyone, I'm British wrestling commentator Dave Bradshaw, and you're listening to Wrestling with Entertainment.
In 3, 2, 1.
Hi everyone, I'm British wrestling commentator Dave Bradshaw, and you're listening to Wrestling with Entertainment.
Hello, and welcome to the show. It's Wrestling with Entertainment, the only audio experience on the web today. The trusted choice for interviewing all your favorite wrestlers every Tuesday and Wednesday on YouTube and Castbox, sponsored by Rogue Energy and Player One Coffee. I'm, of course, your host, James J., and it's a great day for wrestling because we are wrestling with Dave Bradshaw.
How you doing, James?
I'm doing good. How are you today?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm doing all right. I know this is coming out in September, but we're just recording this. It's the day after All In here in London.
That's right.
So it's been a bit. I wasn't actually at All In this year. I was there last year, but I had a busy few days because, as you can imagine, it's a bit like when WrestleMania descends upon a city. There's been lots of other events going on. I've been commentating on some of them, so it's been a pretty tiring weekend for lots of us, I think. But a fun one. Really
I could definitely get that. It's been like the last couple of weeks have been really good for British wrestling. I mean, Zack Sabre Jr. just won the G1 as well.
He did. I was really happy. That's such incredible news. I've known Zack since he was 14, some like 22 years ago, and he's always been like for him the pinnacle has always been Japan, right? You know, I know a lot of people always want to go to WWE or they want to do whatever else, but like for Zack, like even as a very young man, he was watching old like VHS tapes of Japanese classic matches, and he just wanted to be the guy with that style of wrestling. And to see him now getting to be really pretty much, you know, one of the top couple of guys there in New Japan is really fulfilling for those of us who know him. He's a top guy, really great human being. So I was very pleased for him.
Oh yeah. Can you tell us what you have coming up next event-wise?
Mate, I'm doing a lot at the moment. It's good. I had to take a couple of months off at the start of the year. I was a little bit ill, but I'm back in the swing of things now. And now I'm so just after this comes out, I guess early October, I'm going to be in Germany doing WXW's World Tag Team Festival, which is one of the premier tag team tournaments in the world. Goes on over 3 days in Oberhausen, Germany. That's exciting. And then I'm still doing the German Wrestling Federation, which is in Berlin. I do Banger Zone Wrestling, which is based in France and Belgium. A few others on continental Europe, and then in the UK, I'm doing things like I do New Generation Wrestling, which is up in the north of England. I do Riot Cabaret, which is super exciting. They're like a real, probably the hottest thing on the London wrestling scene right now. And I do Pro Wrestling Chaos in the southwest of the country. Another one called PEW, Phenomenal Elite Wrestling. So yeah, loads. I'm super excited that I get to do all this cool stuff. So
it sounds like a lot of talking.
It
sounds like a lot of talking.
It is. Yeah, it's a lot. That's my job. that's what I do. Talk about wrestling, and people keep on booking me to do it. So so hopefully it continues for a while. Yeah.
And where can we find you on social media as well?
Social media, I have my own website, which is www.davebradshaw.tv. And I'm on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it now, at Dave Bradshaw. Although, you know what? I'm not sure how long I'm going to stay on there because it's so toxic on that website now. So I don't know if I will stay there much longer. But I'm on Instagram as well at Dave Bradshaw 83.
Right, and you don't even have to go looking for it. All of the links to all his social media will be in the description of the video below, but on YouTube and Castbox.
Nice.
Alright, now, being a commentator, there's always, you're a second half when it comes to commentary. So can you tell us about your relationships with James R. Kennedy?
James and I have a very unique relationship, and people who might be aware we worked together at a company called What Culture Pro Wrestling, which ran from 2016 to 2019. It was called Defiant Wrestling in its later days, but it ran for 3 years in total. And it was obviously a very exciting time. We had a lot of top talent on there. But James was my commentary partner for a lot of that time. And I don't know if I've ever met anyone who's quite so full of himself. Like he has to look in a mirror he has one of those little hand mirrors with him. So when he's not on camera, he's like constantly checking his hair and checking that his jacket is all in line, all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, sometimes I say to him, mate, no one's looking at you, And he said, well, they should be. So he's he reminds me in a lot of ways. He'll take this as a compliment. I'm not sure if I mean it as a compliment or not, but he has that same obnoxious quality that Bobby Heenan used to have back in the day.
That's a very big compliment.
Yeah. It's this sort of natural ability to be very unlikable. But I guess he's such a he's such a unique personality that I think it is entertaining, right? He's oddly, quite possibly, he might be my favorite commentary partner to work with. I've had lots of good ones, but he's right up there because we have this very weird sort of dynamic where people say we're like an old married couple who are arguing all the time. But I just can't imagine what that must be like, being married to James R. Kennedy. It sounds horrendous. But yeah, he's all right, I suppose.
What do you think attributed your natural chemistry with each other? Because you did just like really click really well.
I think it's that we're so different, probably. I'm this kind of I like to think I'm this fairly morally upstanding person. Just I'm not trying to say I'm really great, like better than anyone else, but just I have that kind of decency that most people have. And when I see something going on in the wrestling ring that isn't right, then I'll call it out. Whereas it just feels like with James, he just wants to, he's constantly making excuses whenever anyone's cheating behind the referee's back, all that kind of stuff. So it's like, well, I guess just having two very different world views on what's right and what's wrong naturally makes for arguments, which I suppose makes for entertaining listening for people at home.
Just listening back in that time, I just remember you two arguing a lot about Joe Henry because he was the prestigious one, and James was very much pro Joe Henry, and you were very much not.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, I've got one thing I always said about Joe, even during those days, is he is not just super talented, but he's like incredibly driven. And so I don't think anyone who worked with him in those What Culture days is at all surprised to see how well he's doing now, because he's just one of those guys who he won't take no for an answer. If a door gets closed in his face, he'll just work 3 times harder until that door reopens or he finds another way in. So he's that kind of guy who was always well, I was going to say he's destined to be a success, but he's one of those people who, it sounds a bit cheesy, but he writes his own destiny. You know what I mean? He's like,
Right.
he doesn't really care whether fate says, that he's supposed to make it. He says, no, I'm going to make it just through sheer force of will. And so, he has. I felt he had a big ego in those days. I think that was apparent from what I used to say on commentary. But you need that. Maybe you need that to some extent to make it. And I think my views on Joe have softened over time because you feel whenever we see someone who was with us in those days of WCPW, you see someone doing as well as he's doing now. It's kind of, you feel kind of proud of them, to have gone through that experience together, and now seeing that he's getting the respect and the recognition that he's long deserved to have in the wrestling world is really cool.
Oh yeah, it's still crazy to me. Like, obviously he's so over right now. I don't think people realize how over of a bad guy he was back in those days, because those crowds would get hostile on him sometimes.
Yeah, which he deserved, and I think he would admit that. But no, that's the thing with Joe, is that like he's everything he turns his hand to, he succeeds at. Like, I don't know if you know, but he was a very successful amateur wrestler, represented Scotland at the Commonwealth Games.
That's right.
Around the same time we were doing the What Culture stuff, obviously made a success of himself, very much so in pro wrestling. He's a talented musician, as we've seen now. All these different things he does, and I can't talk to you about his story of how he became good at music, but I bet it's the same. I bet it's the same thing. It's like someone probably told him at one time, "Oh, you can't learn to play guitar," and that probably is what made him decide that he was going to become a great guitarist as well. So, he's just got that drive, that personality that almost makes his success inevitable, I think.
Another awesome thing you've done is you've actually hosted Jim Cornette's spoken word tour in England. How did that come about, and what was that experience like?
It was a long time ago now. It was 10 years ago, and it was through Wrestle Talk, which at the time was mostly a cable TV show here in the UK on a Sunday night. It's like, I know nowadays Wrestle Talk is one of the top wrestling YouTube brands on the planet, but it started as a TV show, and as part of the plans to expand what Wrestle Talk was becoming, they wanted to start getting involved in live events. And I was already doing some stuff for Wrestle Talk, so I was doing interviews with some people. I was occasionally hosting stuff in the studio, and they decided that I'd be a good person to co-host it. It was me and Joel Ross, who was the main host of Wrestle Talk when it was a TV show. So it was interesting because Jim Cornette and his wife Stacey, I don't think they'd ever been to the UK because Jim is terrified of flying, which you might know. And so he had to pile up on Xanax even to get on the plane. Just had to be drugged essentially to make it across the Atlantic. And then, but once he was here, once he'd had sort of 12 hours to sleep it off, he was fascinating. Like, such an interesting guy. I know he's controversial with some of his views and all that kind of stuff, but I was driving him around the country for most of that week or so that he was here. And on our days off, I was like showing him the sights around London, and to be with him and Stacey and to listen to his, and hers, because she works in the business as well, but to hear both of their stories about wrestling, their philosophies on how the industry should be, to get that sort of old school take on things is really interesting. Like little things, like there's things I still take from my conversations with Jim. Like he always said to me that you should never say that, like, about the area behind the curtain. You should never call it backstage, because we're not presenting this as a theater, we're presenting it as a sport. So you should never say backstage, you should say in the locker room. That kind of thing. which I know some people think is outdated or whatever, but I quite like it because I do think what we're trying to do is present this form of entertainment as a sport, because that's part of the presentation. And so I sometimes say backstage, but I do, like, generally on commentary, I still to this day, 10 years later, I still try and kind of catch myself and say in the locker room and, you know, that kind of thing. And then a couple of years later, actually, I had the chance to commentate with Jim on one of the WCPW shows, and he gave me some advice about just things like, I get quite excitable sometimes on commentary, and he's like, well, that's cool, but like, save some for the main event, right? Because if you've already gone to your top gear on the opening contest of a show, then you've got nowhere higher to go, and so you can't. There's nothing you can do with your voice to put over the fact that the main event is so incredibly exciting, because you've already gone there. You've already sounded that excited 8 or 9 other times earlier on the show. So, like, little things like that, which Jim doesn't necessarily always get the credit for, but I do think he is one of those wrestling minds that is for all of his controversies, he is a genius with what his view of wrestling is.
Right. And like you mentioned, you were able to commentate with Jim, and on a very big match as well, Kurt Angle versus Cody Rhodes.
Yep.
I believe that was when Cody was just coming back onto the independent scenes, and Kurt Angle was just about to go back to WWE. What was that whole moment like? You're sitting next to Jim Cornette, you're commentating Cody Rhodes versus Kurt Angle match.
It was there's a few. I try and be super professional in my career, and I don't try and, you know, to use the wrestling terminology, I try not to mark out too much, right? Like, you know, being a fan where you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. But there's been like a few moments where you try not to show it externally on your face or anything, but inside you're thinking, this is really cool. Like, and one of them is the first time when I was doing the Wrestle Talk stuff, I was talking about aiming to beat Bret Hart, and I was just like, this is amazing, because he's one of my heroes. And then, yeah, to be with Jim, who at that point I'd known for 2 years, you know, someone I consider to be a friend, and to be able to sit with him, someone so experienced as a commentator, and to commentate Kurt Angle, who was, again, one of my top few favorite wrestlers ever, and Cody Rhodes, who at that time was becoming one of my favorites of the current generation, because it was becoming pretty clear that the bold step that Cody had taken in stepping away from WWE to go his own way, forge his own path on the independent scene, was actually something that was really going to pay off, and that he really tapped into something there. So it felt like, yeah, as you say, with Cody just starting that incredible run on the independent scene, and with Kurt Angle being the legend he is and was soon to go back to WWE, to be able to call a match between those two at that moment in wrestling history was then and remains one of my absolute career highlights, for sure.
And currently, you can hear your voice on Peacock, a part of the WWE library, and I still think the WWE network is a thing somewhere.
It is here in the UK. We still have it. We have it. I think it's closing down in January when everything goes to Netflix. But for now, we don't have Peacock over here. So for now, in Europe, there's still the network.
That's crazy. But that's part of WXW. So what's that moment like, hearing yourself on WWE media? Obviously, the network is still a very big thing, and on Peacock, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's yeah. I mean, if you spoke to 8-year-old me and told me that my voice would one day be featured on WWE-owned media, that would be, again, mind-blowing to me. But it's one of those things that it wasn't, by the time it happened, it wasn't like such a, I don't want to sound complacent at all, but it wasn't such a big thing because the British wrestling scene by that point, and the European scene, but Britain as well, in Britain in particular, had been really noticed by WWE at that point. You know, they'd entered into agreements, at least with some of our biggest indie companies, Progress and ICW, and obviously WXW in Germany. A lot of our guys, friends of mine, were being signed up to contracts with NXT UK and all of that kind of thing. So it was all happening at a time when there were lots of us in different ways who were getting that kind of exposure. Now, I'm not claiming I got the exposure on the level that the guys who went to NXT UK or anything like that, but it was strange. Yeah, it was definitely strange. But I think as an industry, as the British independent scene, not me personally, but the scene as a whole, I think deserved that recognition and deserved to be. There were lots of talented wrestlers who deserved to be performing on that high stage, and so I don't know about myself, but certainly seeing my friends be on those platforms was they didn't feel out of place. Maybe I think I always feel I felt out of place because it's, you know, you've always got that kind of imposter syndrome where you're like, oh, I don't know if I deserve to be here, but like seeing a lot of the other people around who I'd worked with getting that kind of exposure, I was like, yeah, they deserve it. They're world-class talents.
Well, going from your friends to maybe somebody you're not too friendly with, can you tell us about your rivalry with Ryan Taylor?
Wow, you've done your homework. So yeah, well, Ryan Taylor is he calls himself an influencer, whatever that is. And he was on one of our reality TV shows over here called Geordie Shore, which I think is like a rip-off of Jersey Shore in the US, right?
It sounds like it.
Yeah, Geordie is like Newcastle, which is a city in the northeast, actually where What Culture was based. And so there was a reality show called Geordie Shore, which I've never watched, but apparently, presumably because he's got muscles, he's got like abs and stuff, because he certainly hasn't got brains, so it can't have been that. But he got onto this TV show and then decided, because you know what these people are like, everyone, they measure their lives by how many followers they have on Instagram or on TikTok or whatever it is. So he obviously decided that he wanted to come and take over a British independent promotion so that it could get him some more influence or whatever these people crave. And so clicks, likes, all these things. So he came to PEW, one of the companies I work for, and I took exception to it because I've worked 16 years now in British wrestling, and I'm one of many people who've worked in really hard in our own ways, each of us, whether we're in-ring wrestlers or commentators, referees, whatever, who've worked really hard over a long period of time to try and get our industry to be the best it can be. So to see someone come into it and want to be basically a parasite, right, trying to leech off of the popularity that our industry has worked hard for just to get himself some clicks and likes, I thought that was not cool, to put it mildly. And so he and I did not get along, and it all ended up with a 6-person tag team match last year, where I put my career in PEW on the line, and he put his precious hairstyle on the line. And fortunately for me, my team won. So we had the pleasure of being able to shave Ryan bald in the middle of the ring in front of a couple of hundred fans, which was a very satisfying moment for me and for everyone. I think the fans enjoyed it too.
You even got a little physical in that match as well, no?
I did. I hit what I like to think was a devastating spear on him. Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair to me, he started it. He hit me with a low blow early in the match. I was over at the commentary desk, and then he was doing his best to, like he always does, to win by any means necessary, cheating to help his team to get the win. So I managed to, I was in quite a lot of pain, but I managed to crawl into the ring just as he was trying to, again, influence the result. And I luckily was able to take him out of commission, and so that the match could end fairly. And when the match ended fairly, my team won just as I thought they would do, because I had every confidence in them. So yeah, it was lucky I managed to get in there, and I was very lucky to have the three wrestlers I had representing me, or I might not have a job in PEW anymore.
All right. Well, from a great rival to being the biggest fan of Murdoch, no?
Murdoch. So Murdoch he's a guy who is, I've got to know over the past, 2 and a bit years since I've been doing Riot Cabaret, which, as I said earlier, is this incredible new promotion that's been just growing its fan base in London over the past couple of years. It's like, we just did a show with them on the Friday night of All In Weekend, and they had 500 fans in the venue. It's called a big sort of music venue called the Clapham Grand. It was sold out, and it's wild what's happening there. It's, you know, when you sometimes get the feeling of a promotion that's got this buzz about it, like it's the next big thing. Oh, yeah. Riot Cabaret is very much that on the UK scene at the moment. But Murdoch, I met, he wasn't booked on the first Riot Cabaret show, which is, we're talking like June 2022, and decided to take matters into his own hands. He threw a tantrum essentially by interfering in someone else's match, costing them the chance to be the first world champion in Riot Cabaret, just so he could get some attention. He's another attention seeker. He's a bit like Ryan Taylor, or he was a bit like that at least to start with. And then he ended up sort of as the whipping boy for a faction called the Greedy Vultures that was headed up by Spike Trivet. And ultimately, in his, to be fair to him, he realized that wasn't the way to conduct himself. And he's still relatively early in his wrestling career, and he's had a real change in outlook over the past year. Now he's abandoned the sort of persona that he sort of was putting on to try and make himself seem like a really big tough guy, and he's gone to what's more his real self, I think, which is he's this human jukebox. He carries around, I don't know if it's like an iPod, I didn't know those still existed, but he's got some kind of MP3 player, whatever, with him. And whenever certain types of music play, I don't know how he manages to hook up his player to the stereo system in the venue, but he's able to channel the vibes of that music and use that to help him win matches, which is interesting. I've never seen anyone do that before. So he's one to watch, definitely.
All right. So maybe not your favorite person, but has redeemed himself.
I like him more than I did. Yeah, I mean there was room for improvement, certainly.
All right. Now you mentioned it. You interviewed Bret Hart. Obviously one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. What was that moment like?
Well, it was weird because this was in like November, which is pretty cold here in England, and Bret was doing one of these Q&A tours, a bit like the one I did with Jim Cornette, and he was doing one of his shows in the football stadium for Leicester City, which is one of the Premier League teams in England. And for some reason, we were granted an interview with him, which was going to be filmed in the stands, like in the bleachers, right, of this Premier League stadium, but at night in a completely empty stadium with all the lights off, other than our spotlight from our camera crew. And so here I am in this 30,000 seat stadium. It's completely empty and dark, pretty freezing cold as well. And the only people there are the cameraman, me, and Bret the Hitman Hart. And I'm asking one of my heroes about SummerSlam '92 mainly, which is like the first live wrestling show I ever went to when I was a kid. It's still think of it as a major moment in my childhood, because it's one of the things that made me decide I wanted to be working in wrestling as an adult. And there I was. I got to talk to the guy who main evented that show about it in this weird environment of this empty stadium, and it was again just another of those moments where you're like, man, I'm talking to Bret Hart about that day at Wembley, and here I am in this weird, dark, cold place doing that. And it was like, okay, life is weird, but life is cool.
Speaking of SummerSlam 92, was you cheering for Bret Hart, or was you on British Bulldog side?
Oh, I was on Bulldog side. That was how I started the interview with Bret. I apologized to him. I said, look, I owe you an apology because at the time, I guess it must have been 22, 23 years ago, I was a kid at Wembley Stadium, and I was booing you. And he said, oh, that's okay, kid. I think a lot of people were that night. I always find I think it's funny to me now, because it's like Bret Hart and Macho Man Randy Savage are two of my absolute favorites, both in my top 5 wrestlers of all time, without doubt. And on my first ever live wrestling show, SummerSlam, I booed both of them because I was cheering the other guys. I was cheering Ultimate Warrior against Savage and British Bulldog against Bret. So I'm like, man, 9-year-old Dave had some bad taste. But yeah, it was nice that Bret forgave me. I thank him for that.
I asked because it doesn't get more Canadian than Bret Hart in Montreal, and I had another wrestler come on that was at the Montreal Screwjob, and he was like, "Yeah, I was cheering for Shawn Michaels."
Wow, a wrestler who was a fan in the crowd.
Yes, at the time he was a fan in the crowd, but he's a wrestler now. But he was like, "No, okay. I was cheering for Shawn Michaels."
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's worse people you could cheer for. Shawn Michaels is one of the greatest of all time as well. So,
oh, yeah.
I still think I'm still a big fan of Ultimate Warrior's work in ring and Davey Boy Smith. Their character. With Bulldog was actually a legitimately pretty good in-ring worker as well, and then Warrior maybe less so. But Warrior is his like persona, this crazy face-painted madman, was just, when you're that age, when you're 9 years old, 100% he was the coolest guy. Like everyone, like me and all of my friends at that age, we were all Warrior guys, not Hogan guys. I don't know what that says about us, but it was, but that's how we all felt. And so like when SummerSlam came to our nearest stadium, and not only that, but Ultimate Warrior was challenging for the World Championship, it was like, it couldn't have been more of a dream come true to us. And then, as it turned out, actually the highlight of the night wasn't even that match. The highlight was Bret against Bulldog, but the whole night was just magical. Even looking back now, people in the Wrestle Talk office where I work, they make fun of me because I go, "Oh, Dave's talking about SummerSlam '92 again." I'm like, yeah, here I am, because it's one of the coolest nights of my life as a fan.
Well, you was at All In last year as well. I'm sure you've been in Wembley since then, but obviously the first time since a pro wrestling event was in there since SummerSlam. So what was that kind of like, to be back in Wembley for wrestling?
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, the Wembley Stadium, I don't know if you know, but the Wembley Stadium that existed in 1992 doesn't exist anymore. So it was knocked down in like 2000, and then the new Wembley Stadium was built on the same site. It's in the same place, but it is a different building, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it was cool, because there was this like deja vu kind of thing. When I went in 92, it was the first time I'd been to Wembley Stadium. So there's this big, long walkway up from the train station up to the stadium. It's called Wembley Way, which is this sort of iconic pathway. which I remember walking up as a kid and just staring up at this massive stadium as we got closer to it. And then to be back there 31 years later, walking the same road to go again to Wembley Stadium to watch wrestling was pretty good. Yeah, it was something. But it was just a very different time, because obviously when I was a kid, I was just going with my dad and my brother and my friend, and you're 9 years old, so everything, it's the biggest crowd I'd ever been in. Whereas like since then, I've been to Wembley a lot of times to watch football, soccer, and obviously this time at Wembley last year at All In, I was involved with some of the stuff Wrestle Talk were doing. So I was sort of around the stadium, outside in some of the pubs and other like venues all day doing things. So it was like a whole day event, if that makes sense, rather than just going into the stadium for the actual show itself. So it was different, but it was, yeah, there was a sense of coming full circle in a way.
All right. Now, another name you've done commentary with is a one Santino Marella, for a promotion in Poland.
Yes.
What was that like? Because Santino does have the gift of gab, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, it was weird because I was traveling. It was the first show I'd ever done in Poland. A company called PTW, who've been putting on great shows in Poland, really high production values, big crowds, and they'd asked me to come over and commentate this show, and it was going to be live on Fight TV and maybe DAZN as well. It was broadcasting live around the world. You know what I mean? It was kind of like it was one of those shows that it was live, it wasn't pre-recorded, so I needed to get there.
Right.
And I was flying with a British wrestler called Johnny Storm, who was also on the show, and we were on the same flight, but it got delayed, and then basically by the time once we got to Polish like customs, this was early 2022, so there was still like a lot of COVID restrictions. You had to show proof of your vaccine and all that kind of stuff to get into the country, and so it took us like 3 hours to get through customs. And basically, by the time we were getting out of the airport, it was 40 minutes until the show started, and the drive was 30 minutes, right?
Oh,
so,
no.
So I was like, okay, well, and I wasn't wearing my suit or anything. Obviously, Johnny wasn't in his wrestling gear, so it was like, okay, well, we're going to have to get there and get changed immediately. And so, yeah, we arrived with literally about 8 minutes before this show was going live on air. And they passed me some notes about the matches. I'd done a little bit of homework in advance, so that was okay. I met Santino backstage, said hi, and then it was like, cool, see you out there, man. And that was it. And then, so having met the guy for 20 seconds, I then went and broadcasted a 3-hour live pay-per-view with him. But he was just the loveliest guy, like such a nice man to me. And whenever we were off air, when they were doing like video promo packages or whatever, we were chatting. He was telling me all about his family, everything that was going on with him. It was like I'd known him for years, and yeah, just incredibly nice and very talented on commentary as well. Like he's one of those naturally entertaining people who I think gravitate to a form of entertainment like pro wrestling, because he was always going to be someone whose job in life was to make people laugh or smile, and I was kind of blown away actually by how good he is when it was with, as I say, 20 seconds of prior preparation together. He was able to go out there with me, and we were able to, I hope, pull off a pretty good broadcast. So big respect for Santino.
You've done a commentary for quite a few different countries. Is there any maybe difference in wrestling style or culture-wise when it comes to pro wrestling in another country that you've commentated? Like you're like, well, that's different, or I've never seen that before.
Yeah, well, 100%. Like I did some of the commentary for, not directly for New Japan and for CMLL and AAA in Mexico, but for companies that bought their footage and then wanted English language commentary so that they could put that footage on English speaking TV channels around the world.
Right.
So I wasn't there in like Arena Mexico or in the Tokyo Dome or anything like that, but I was in a studio in England commentating hours and hours of Japanese stuff and Mexican stuff. And just doing those two, never mind other countries, like the difference between Japanese wrestling and Mexican wrestling is immense. You know, with this Japanese presentation, like it's sort of a very quite serious, like it's a very real sport, that strong style that they have in ring, very hard hitting, which I think I'm more naturally suited to commentating than some of the Mexican stuff, which was a bit more, quite often more light-hearted. There's a lot of sort of characters that are intended to be funny, and it's difficult sometimes because sometimes I was doing Japanese and Mexican stuff on the same day, so I would call like I don't know, I would call like an Okada match or something like in New Japan, and then I would be calling like a trios match between 3 clowns and 3 dragons, you know, from Mexico. And they're just such different forms of entertainment. Obviously, they're all happening inside a wrestling ring, but just the physical style of moves that they do and the different stories they're trying to tell it's kind of jarring to go from one to the other. But I don't know how many hours of Japanese stuff I did. I did quite a lot more of the Mexican stuff. I probably did 60 hours or so of Mexican TV, and it does teach you to, even when sometimes you're not quite sure what's going on as well, because obviously the promos are in Spanish and,
right,
and whatever. So like but to be able to think on your feet and to keep on broadcasting and to commentate when you're working with little information, but not to kind of just collapse and sort of panic in that situation, I think was really good training, because I think then it meant that what I went on to do with other places, like doing What Culture or WXW or all the various British promotions that I'm lucky enough to do now, it's made me a better commentator, that experience, I think.
Now, like we've said, you've done commentary for incredible wrestlers, you know, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks, the list goes on and on. Can you tell us about doing commentary for Mr. Blobby?
So this was in Riot Cabaret as well, and the first time Mr. Blobby appeared was in Mr. Blobby, by the way, is kind of an icon in the UK. I don't know, people who aren't listening from the UK won't know who he is. He's this weird alien. He's a man in a suit, basically, with this big pink. It's almost like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters, if you know who that is. Like,
that's a good way to describe him.
Big lumbering character, but he's pink with yellow spots, and he was notorious on British TV in the 90s for just causing chaos wherever he went and just sort of harassing celebrities and falling all over the place, knocking over the scenery whenever he was in a TV studio. And we thought, I think, as a country, that we'd managed to get rid of him. And then he appeared in Riot Cabaret in this Rumble match. I think this was the first time, must have been maybe early 2023, and I wasn't there. That was the first time I'd missed a Riot Cabaret show because I tested positive for COVID that morning.
Oh.
So I didn't go. I was fine, but I didn't want to spread it, you know. So I'd stayed home, and so someone else commentated it, and I was like, oh my god! But I started seeing, I'm kind of lying in bed feeling sorry for myself, flicking through Instagram and stuff, and I start seeing all my friends in the locker room like having selfies with Mr. Blobby on Instagram. I'm like, what is going on? Like, why is Mr. Blobby at Riot Cabaret? And then he made a triumphant return at our Christmas show this Christmas just gone, 2023, where I was there and I got to meet him and have my own selfie with the television legend that is Mr. Blobby. So that was another one of those moments that young Dave would have thought was pretty cool.
All right. Now, I'm not entirely sure the connection here. Maybe you can fill in the blanks for me. But can you tell us about Cowman?
Cowman is my distant cousin, and he was known for appearing at a series of wrestling events in like at carnivals, like like summer fairs. I guess like county fairs, you would call them in the US.
Yeah.
Those kind of events that happen in the summer where there's like different stalls and stuff, people going around. It happens outdoors, and he looks exactly like me, but obviously dressed as a cow. And some people say he was me, but that's never been proven. And he took part in a couple of battle royals at these county fairs. This was a long time ago. This was like 2009, and he was undefeated. And then he disappeared again. No one's ever seen him or heard of him since. So one of the battle royals, he won by eliminating Zack Sabre Jr., by the way.
Wow. This
is 15 years ago. So, and I don't know if Zack's ever fully recovered from that. But he's an enigma in the wrestling world, is Cowman, because he appeared, like I said, 15 years ago, won a couple of battle royals in the British countryside, beat some of the best future stars in the business, and then he's never been seen since, but he's undefeated.
I mean, if he drew Zack Sabre Jr. out, I feel like that should give him an opportunity at Zack's G1 contract clause at this point.
Yeah. I mean, some people have said that Cowman's the best technical wrestler of his generation. But again, it's a game of opinions, right? Who's to say? Is Zack better than Cowman? Is Cowman better than Zack? It's a big question.
Well, considering that he has a W over Zack, I'd say it's him.
Yeah, and Zack won the G1 Climax, but Cowman wasn't in it.
Correct.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's time for Dave's Bizarre Adventure. You're in the pro wrestling world, and weird, crazy, and bizarre things are bound to happen. Can you tell us a road story that fits that description?
A road story that's weird?
Weird, crazy, and or bizarre.
Oh, man. I'm not like the thing with like we talk about road stories, but you got to understand that the UK is kind of small, so we do have we do spend quite a lot of time on the road. But one thing I always think is better than the US for us is I can't imagine being one of the guys on the US indie scene where you're regularly driving 6 hours or more, whatever, for like something that's described as a local show. Whereas for me, if it's more than like 2 hours away, I'm like, man, this is like a journey like Frodo going to Mount Doom. Do you know what I mean? It's like a journey of a lifetime in the UK in our minds if we're traveling more than a couple of hours. So we're lucky that we don't have to go quite so far. But I think that adventure in Poland, that was more of an air story than a road story, but getting to a venue just moments before we were live on international television and actually, to be honest, that's happened to me more than once. So there was a What Culture show that we were doing. Well, I don't think it was going out live, to be fair, but we were doing a show in Edinburgh in Scotland, and I had vastly underestimated how long it takes to get, because we don't travel that far normally. So I'd vastly underestimated how long it takes to drive from London to Edinburgh, particularly if there's traffic. Like I kind of figured out, Newcastle, where we used to go regularly, that was about 5 hours. So I'm like, well, Edinburgh must be like 6. And actually it turned out to be like, because of traffic, it turned out to be like an 8.5 hour journey.
Oh, damn.
I arrived at one of our, I think it was a Loaded taping. Loaded was our weekly TV show on What Culture. I arrived for that about 3 minutes before it started. And then I went out there, and there was I was with James R. Kennedy commentating, and there was this debuting tag team. I won't say who they were because they've gone on to be quite successful. So, but they were good then. They showed up. They had this debut, but I realized I had no idea we knew what the team name was because the ring announcer said it. But I didn't know what either of the individual wrestlers' names were because I obviously hadn't gone around and asked because I'd arrived right before the show started. And so I passed James a note saying, "What are their names?" ? So he looked at me and shrugged. And so then I called over one of the ring crew, passed the note to him, and wrote on it, "Give this to Pacitti, Adam Pacitti," who's now, you might know, he's with Cultaholic, but was then the producer in our ear at What Culture Pro Wrestling. So I watched as this guy took this message over to the production desk, which I could see from where we were, and I watched as Adam Pacitti read this note, and then he looked over at me and just shrugged his shoulders. So I'm like, okay, so it seems no one in the building knows what either of these two guys are called. So I'm like, by now we're 3 minutes into the match. So I'm like, okay, well, how do I keep on calling this without saying either person's name? I just had to say things like, "Oh, what a great suplex he just did," without actually saying who either of them were and just using their team name. And so I probably said some very weirdly structured sentences. And then I think about 2 minutes before the finish of the match, someone passed me a note with their names and which one was which. And so suddenly I used each of their names about 50 times each in the last 2 minutes of the match to make up for the fact that I hadn't been able to for the rest. So there's a lesson there. If you're a young commentator starting out in the business, which is try not to be late to shows because there's important research that you'll miss out on doing before you go out there.
I mean, James not knowing the names, it kind of seems on par, but literally nobody else around ring crew knew what their names were.
Yeah, I would hope. I had hoped our producers might have known, but anyway, it all worked out.
Now, you do have a website, and I did browse it for obviously this interview. The one thing that does kind of stand out is literally the front page, which says professional wrestling commentator, London-based, with full driver's license. Can you tell us why you're so proud of having a full driver's license?
Because that's surprisingly important in wrestling, in independent wrestling at least, right? Because if you're able to drive to a show, then first of all, the promoter doesn't have to arrange for someone else to pick you up. And it also means, especially obviously if you've got a driving license and you've got your own car, that you can pick people up and bring others with you. So it's one of those weird things that shouldn't make the difference, right? Everything not just in wrestling, in every industry should be based purely on who has the most ability, and then everything else will figure out. That's how everything should be. But in reality, the logistics of putting on a wrestling show, you need people who can drive. And so if you've got same with wrestlers, not just commentators, if you had two good wrestlers who you were considering booking, and one of them can drive and has a car, then that's more advantageous to you as a promoter than someone who doesn't. So it's one of those things. It's a bit like how, if you're applying for a job outside of wrestling, you're just putting your resume to someone when you're applying for a job. If you speak a second language, right, that can be helpful.
Right. Because
that might give you an advantage over other applicants. So it's yeah, man, having a driver's license is a useful skill on the independent wrestling scene, because even in England, where we don't have to travel that far, but we still have to travel and we still need cars.
Do a lot of wrestlers in England don't have driver's license? Is that a thing?
Yeah. I mean, some people do, some people don't. Like over here, I think it varies by state in the US, right? What age you can be, but over here you have to be 17, and it's quite intensive. Like it's quite hard to pass your driving test in the UK. So it took me 6 or 7 months of lessons. And then this is when I was 17, so a long time ago now. But and then I still failed the test the first time.
Wow.
And then you have to wait another 3 or 4 weeks or something before you're allowed to take it a second time. And I managed to pass it the second time. But it's a lot of lessons, and the lessons are expensive. And depending on where you live, you don't even necessarily need a car, because we have most of our cities have pretty good public transport and places where you can walk. Well, that's something I always notice in American cities, by the way. It's impossible to walk around some of America's cities because they don't have sidewalks everywhere. Suddenly you'll be walking on a sidewalk and it just kind of disappears. It just ends. And then you're like, well, where am I supposed to go now? So, well, you should have had a car. So it's like that. Yeah. In the UK, because it's expensive and lengthy to learn to drive, and because if you live in a city with good transportation links, you don't necessarily need to drive in your everyday life anyway. I think maybe that's a reason why not quite so many teenagers learn to drive as they do in the US.
Right, like in California where I'm from, you literally need a car to go anywhere. Nothing is walking distance. Everything is like a 20-minute drive. But in New York, it's like, why would you own a car? There's 15 other types of transportation where you could get places.
Right, same in London. Yeah, so New York City is a good example, because I would imagine if you owned a car in Manhattan, then even just finding a space to park it in would be super expensive. Everything's expensive in Manhattan, and it's the same in London. It's it would cost you a large amount to own a car in the middle of London, and you don't need it because there's our equivalent of the subway, which is the tube. You can get everywhere within the city anyway. So so I think there's good reasons why not so many British people have licenses.
Well, let's go from driving to walking. You're a big mental health advocate, and you actually walked 90 miles in 3 days for charity. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was just it was 5 years ago this month. Feels like a long time ago, because it was longer than that even, because it was pre-COVID, which feels like a lifetime ago.
Right.
But me and a friend decided we just wanted a challenge, and decided it would be cool to walk. So there's between England and Scotland, or the ancient border where the border used to be between England and Scotland, we have something called Hadrian's Wall, right? Which is a wall the Romans built, I think, to keep the Scottish people out of England. And I think it's if you've seen Game of Thrones, the wall, the ice wall on Game of Thrones that keeps the wildlings up north. I think that was based on Hadrian's Wall, is the idea. Why Hadrian's Wall isn't as big as that wall. Okay. But anyway, so there's this wall that runs from the east coast of England to the west coast at its narrowest point, which is only 90 miles wide. And there's a whole walking trail that you can do from one end to the other. So over here, the last weekend in August, we have a public holiday on the Monday, so it's a 3-day weekend. And my friend and I decided, well, we could try and walk during those 3 days. We could try and walk the distance, because I figured, well, I've done a 30-mile walk in a day before, and your legs kind of hurt at the end, but it's doable. So I thought, well, it's just that 3 times, right? So we could do that. It'd be fun. Then we can say we walked from coast to coast, east coast to west coast in our own country. And so we did, but oh my God, by the second or third day, the third day especially, there is a big difference walking 30 miles when you've just walked 60 miles
Right.
the previous 2 days. And it was like, my legs would like barely bend. We were in like so much pain. It was like, let's never do this again. But we made it. So we did get there in 3 days. But if anyone else is gonna do that walk, I would. I mean, obviously in the middle, it's kind of hilly as well. There's not mountains, but there's hills and stuff. So it's not like it's just flat either. So if anyone is planning, it's a beautiful walk. But if anyone is planning on doing that walk, if you live in the UK, I would suggest maybe 6 days, not 3, would be a more leisurely way to do it.
Well, training for that was particularly entertaining as well, as you walked 27 miles across 26 bridges. No?
Yeah, yeah. Wow, you really do know your stuff. So we only decided to do it like 3 weeks before we did it, the long walk, the 90-mile walk. So my friend and I decided I bought some new hiking boots, and I was like, well, I need to wear them in, right? You can't just wear brand new boots on a long walk because you'll get blisters and it'll be painful. And so I'm going to wear my new boots, and what we'll do, I came up with this gimmick that we would walk, across every bridge that goes across the River Thames in the City of London, which turns out it's like a 27-mile walk. So it's basically the same kind of length as one of the days of the walk we were planning. And I thought, well, we can take a selfie on each bridge, and then put it on Insta or Twitter or whatever, and drive people to our fundraising page. It'll be a good way to raise more money. It's also wearing in my boots. It's a warm up. So we did it, and it was a nice day. It was fine. We had a good time. And then the following day, the day we did the walk on the bridges was the weekend before we were going to do the long walk. So it was only 7 days between them, and I realized that my big toe nail on my left foot was in agony the following day after we did this walk on the bridges. And so I had to go to a doctor to look at my foot, because I was like, man, I'm walking like 90 miles in 5 days time or 6 days time. Am I going to be all right? What's wrong? He goes, yeah. He said like your new boots are a bit like, they must have been a bit small because they've been like ramming the toenail into the toe. Ooh. So he said like, basically that this is gross, by the way. So if anyone is squeamish, you might not want to listen to this. But he said like, that toenail is going to die. So the only way I can make it not agonizingly painful for you to do this 90-mile walk in 6 days time is to remove the toenail.
Oh God.
So I was like, okay, like how do we do that? And he was like, well, here's a cloth, just like a rag. He's like, put this in your mouth and bite down on it hard. And then he grabs this pair of like pliers, basically grabs this half dead toenail, but it's only half dead. Like the nerves are still, everything attaching it to the toe is still very much had feeling. And then he yanks it, and he yanked it like 2 or 3 times before it came off. And I was like, it was the most pain I've ever been in. I was just like, oh my God, this is what being tortured must be like. And then eventually it came off, and like 20 seconds after it came off, my toe didn't even hurt anymore. But oh my God, it was painful. So I feel like I earned I paid my dues, as they say in wrestling, to be able to get to the start line of that 90-mile walk, because 5 days earlier I was in a doctor's room in agony.
Yeah, that definitely paying your dues, to say the least.
It grew back, by the way. The toenail does grow back, if anyone's worried.
That's good to know. And here I just had a question about one of the bridges.
Oh, go on.
One of the bridges, crossing one of the bridges actually ruined your enjoyment of Harry Potter.
I guess it would. I don't remember, but the bridge that's associated with Harry Potter in London is the Millennium. It's called the Millennium Bridge. It's a footbridge, right? And it's the one that the Dementors destroy at the start of. Oh my God, I can't remember which movie. One of the movies, maybe number 5 or something. It's a funny bridge because it's called the Millennium Bridge because it opened in the year 2000. And when they opened it, it was open for a day, and it was like swaying like several yards from side to side when people were walking on it. So like that's not right. People were getting kind of seasick walking on the bridge, so they had to close it for like a month and then reopen it. So it's got its own like unique history in real life, but in Harry Potter world, it's the bridge that got demolished. So that was one of the bridges I crossed on that epic journey that day.
All right. Now, you've done, like we said, commentary. You've written articles. You've done podcasts. You've interviewed. You've pretty much done it all. Other than getting into the ring itself, except that Cowman, which we'll save for another time. That being said, can you tell us about wanting to start a podcast on how to breed golden chocobos?
Did I say that? When did I say that?
Quite some time ago, on Twitter.
Oh, did I?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I, as a kid, was big into Final Fantasy VII, the original version, right, on the PS1. And as anyone who's a connoisseur of Final Fantasy will know, in order to really ace that game, you can win, you can beat the main story, but if you're going to beat all of the optional bosses on that game, you really need this weapon. It's a summon. Like you can summon these kind of big monsters to help you out. And there's this one called Knights of the Round, which you can only get if you have a golden chocobo. Chocobo is like an ostrich type animal that you ride around in Final Fantasy world. And I know I'm one of a relatively few people, I think, or I was at the time, who know how to masterfully breed one of those in the game. And so I think that's a marketable skill that I could sell with not even like a podcast. Podcasts are free. I could make it like an online thing that people pay for. But I just wonder. I don't know whether there's an audience for it now, because that was in the late 1990s, and now there's like a Final Fantasy VII remake now, so I don't even know if my knowledge is still relevant on the remake. But yeah, on the original, there's a few like late 90s video games where I'm pretty good. Like the other one is Mario Kart 64, where I am. I don't in general, I don't think I'm that good at video games, so I don't like to brag. But I would guess I'm probably in the top 100 in the world on Mario Kart 64.
That's impressive.
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good.
Mario Kart 64 had literally the best Rainbow Bridge out of all the other Mario Karts.
See, I think Rainbow Road, right? I think that's the worst track on the game. Because it takes like 7.5 minutes, unless you cheat and take one of the shortcuts. But no, I don't know. I mean, I can do it, but I just find it a bit boring.
I get that. It is the longest one out of all of them, but that's why I like it. It's because it's an epic last track for the game.
Yeah, that's true. It is epic. It's a good test of if you're able to drift with the cars.
Very true.
But yeah. So okay. So your Mario Kart 64. That's good.
Yes. I believe that was the first Mario Kart I've actually played. So yeah. Good memories there.
Nice.
All right. Let's get into the colossal question. Let's say they're making a movie about you. Every movie has a soundtrack. What would be the first 3 songs on your movie soundtrack?
Oh man, I don't know. Well, I don't know what. I don't even know what the plot of the movie would be. Like, what's the interesting hook? Like,
Well,
I guess.
I always think that I always started as, it's going to be a biopic about you, but I mean, you're a producer on it. It could be whatever you want. It could be a zombie movie, a sci-fi movie, whatever you'd like.
I will say, I'll tell you what's on my mind today, and it's because they're about to announce a reunion. But when I was growing up when I was a teenager in like the 90s, the biggest band in England by far was a band called Oasis, who they had a couple of songs that I think did well in the charts in the US. I don't know if you've heard the song Wonderwall or Champagne Supernova.
Yeah.
I think those did okay. But like, I think in the US they're probably considered as, oh yeah, they're a band who had a couple of songs. Whereas like in England, they were the top music act for 6 or 7 years, right? They were like, they were the sort of leaders of this movement called Britpop in the 90s, which was this kind of cool new style of like indie rock music that was, if you're a teenager at the time, was the thing to be into. And their main 2 guys in the band are 2 brothers who have fallen out horribly, and they've barely spoken to each other in the past 15 years or so.
Right.
But apparently they've just made up, and as we're recording, supposedly tomorrow, they're going to announce that they're doing a reunion tour next year. So they're like the soundtrack of my youth, that band. So I'd probably have at least a couple of Oasis songs on there. I was into like American bands wise, I was into like that kind of alt rock sort of movement of the 90s, kind of very middle of the road, nothing particularly like super rebellious or anything, but like the Goo Goo Dolls, that kind of band from like the late 90s. I was super into that. More recently, I'm still an indie guy really. I loved when I was at uni in like the 2000s. I loved the Killers, and now I like Gaslight Anthem, bands like that. So there's like a few, but I also like the classic English acts. Like I'm always annoyed with myself because he's just stopped touring. That I never went and saw Elton John. I think he's great. So I don't know. There's loads. I couldn't pick 3 songs.
I gotcha, but definitely no ABBA, right?
No ABBA.
Yes.
You can say. Yeah, I've never really understood ABBA. I've never understood the appeal. Like, it's not my thing. But I know some people love that stuff. So each to their own.
Now we know why you haven't commentated in Sweden.
Yeah, I know. I haven't commentated in Sweden. That's true. I don't think I haven't done any of Scandinavia. I haven't done Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Yeah. If someone in Scandinavia wants to book me, that'd be nice, because I'd like to go there. It'd be fun.
Vegan, if you're listening, book the man.
There we go. Yeah.
Now that we have the soundtrack down, everybody knows you get the soundtrack first, then you write the script, and then you go to casting. Who plays Dave? And you can't say yourself because you are obligated to make a Stan Lee-esque cameo.
Okay. Well, I'm like 6'7", so it's got to be someone tall. Who's like a tall Hollywood actor? But like, obviously, they need to be handsome. I don't want someone like ugly playing me.
I think Chris Hemsworth is like in the 6'7" range.
Yeah. Okay. Chris Hemsworth. I like that. I think that might be kind of flattering to me, but we'll go with it. Yeah.
Okay.
Chris Hemsworth.
Now every movie has a supporting cast. who's 3 people significant to you and your story that would be in your movie, and who would play them?
Well, I guess if it's about my wrestling career, you probably would have James R. Kennedy in it. Who would we have play him? Oh man, who's like someone super annoying? Like, I don't know. Who's really full of who's really full of himself? Like James Corden.
Okay.
He's full of himself.
There you go.
Yeah. James, and also James R. Kennedy will hate that. So let's go
That's
with
a
that.
double whammy.
Yeah. Who else? Man, who else is in my story? Can I just have like wrestlers playing themselves?
Sure, why not?
Okay, well then I'll have the people you talked about. I'll have like we've talked about Cody, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio. You mentioned he's a super nice guy. Like he's incredibly humble for someone who's like one of the biggest wrestlers on the planet. So assuming that they're all desperate for work, they want to be in my movie. They could all have jobs because they were all nice. Cody's really nice. Kurt I only got a chance to say hi to briefly, but he seemed cool as well. So they can all be in my movie. But we'll have to negotiate on pay. I think they're all quite expensive, I would guess.
Right.
And I want to keep all the profits, obviously. So.
Right. And it is sounding like a big movie, a blockbuster to say the least.
Yeah.
And you could pre-order the tickets now.
Yeah.
Alright. Now, you are from the UK, so I do have 2 UK exclusive questions for you.
Okay.
The first one being, KFC or Nando's?
I think KFC. I was saying this to someone. Who was I saying this to? Oh, it was Riot Cabaret this past week. We had a surprise appearance from Thunder Rosa, right? Who's the former AEW Women's World Champion.
Yeah.
Which was cool. Nice to see her. I met her last year. She's really nice. But I was talking to her manager, and he'd gone and got her Nando's. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, whenever anyone comes over from North America, they the first thing they all want to do is have Nando's. And I'm like, I like Nando's. It's fine, but it's chicken and chips ultimately. Do you know what I mean? It's not like it. I don't see what's incredible about it. Like, the seasoning's nice, obviously, that's all cool, but it's like I think I'm missing why it's wonderful. But then someone explained to me, they were like, whenever you go to the US, is there something that you have to have immediately? And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's slightly different now because we have it here now, but years ago, it was like, as soon as I got off the plane in the US, I had to have Taco Bell. Because we didn't have it here. And it was like the most delicious thing in the world. So I get it. I get that people have their thing that they want to eat as soon as they arrive in a particular country, but I just don't understand. I don't understand why Nando's is the thing that, because it's almost everyone. Almost everyone I know. Jim Cornette was another guy who's like became obsessed with Nando's when he was here. I don't quite understand what it is that's so addictive about Nando's, but there we go.
I think it's more of a wrestling community thing because we've heard it so many times from so many wrestlers. I mean, even Will Ospreay's kick is called the Cheeky Nando's. So
yeah,
there's definitely a curiosity there.
No, I know people from the US that I don't know through wrestling, like who are equally obsessed. So I don't think it's just a wrestling thing. I think it's an Americans coming to the UK thing. Okay. So I've never figured it out.
And the second question is the greatest person to ever be knighted Sir Patrick Stewart?
Is the greatest person to be knighted ever Sir Patrick Stewart?
Yes.
No. There must be other. Oh, like Richard Attenborough, right? Look at the old guy from Jurassic Park. He was knighted. Who else has been knighted? Sean Connery knighted. James Bond, I think. There's probably some far more like worthy people who've done really important work as well. No, I'm assuming you must be asking that from a US Star Trek guy.
I'm more of an X-Men guy, but
Oh, X-Men. Okay, yeah, he's in that too, right? Like, yeah, like he's not. I've never been into X-Men or Star Trek, and those are his two big. Those are his two big things. So to me, no, he's not. He's not even in the top. I'm sure he's a lovely man, but he's not in the top 10.
okay, making statements here.
Yeah.
On to a controversial subject: pineapple on pizza. What's your stance?
I think everyone seems to think that you have to have a very strong opinion on this either way. I'm like, it's okay. I like ham on a pizza. I think I probably prefer ham and mushroom. But I've had ham and pineapple on pizza, and it's all right. It's not my favorite pizza topping, but I like some people seem to think anyone who eats pineapple on pizza should be sent immediately to jail. Which I don't. Again, it's a bit like the Nando's thing. I don't really understand the strength of feeling either way on it.
So you're leaning a little bit more towards anti rather than pro. Ever so slightly.
I don't know. I guess I'm more pro. I think it tastes all right. But again, my main feeling on it is that I just don't understand why, because lots of people ask that question, and I don't understand why it's such a major source of disagreement. Because the people who think that you shouldn't have pineapple on pizza seem to think that it's an actual crime to have it. And I don't understand that. I don't think it's that bad.
All right. What's your spirit Pokemon?
So, I didn't even I have a 10-year-old nephew who is super into Pokemon, and he has to teach me about it because Pokemon passed me by because I was a little too old, I guess, to be into it as a young kid. I don't think it really came out until early 90s, maybe.
Late 90s.
Late 90s, yeah, well, especially then, if it was late 90s. Because by 1991 onwards, I was just into wrestling. That's all I cared about. So, and I never had, although I'm, as I've said, excellent at Mario Kart 64, I never had Nintendo growing up. It was my friends who had it. So I used to have Sega, what we call it the Mega Drive here, but the Genesis, right? What it's called in the US, and then I had PlayStations. So I never played the Pokemon video games particularly, and I never watched the cartoons because I was kind of too old. So I know about Pikachu, and there's one called Bulbasaur.
Yes.
And there's a guy called Farfetch'd, who's a bird who just holds a spring onion and just says Farfetch'd all the time.
Yes.
And then after that, Charmander.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I'm kind of stuck.
All right. Well, you named at least 4 out of the original 151, so you're on your way.
Okay. I did briefly, when was it, 2015 or 2017 or something, when Pokemon Go came out and everyone was super into it for a week.
Right.
I jumped on that pop culture bandwagon because why wouldn't you? So there was that week in that summer where I was doing the same thing everyone else was doing, which was walking around randomly chasing imaginary Pokemon. But then, that lasted about a week, and then I was like, this is stupid. What wrestling is on?
Well, we love the late great Tracy Smothers on the show. Do you know the acronym for Thug? THUG.
I do not.
T
Tell me.
is for terrible, H is
Yeah.
for hell, U is for ugly, and G is for jail. 'Cause a Doug can't spell.
Right. Nice. I like it.
Yes, we love the late great Tracy Smothers, trying to keep the memory alive on the show.
Good. Yeah, Tracy Smothers was great.
Oh yeah. With this question you'll be asked on a wrestling interview. Would you ever consider commentating for a match with a Rock? Not Dwayne Johnson, not the Country, an actual physical Rock.
I mean, I've commentated weirder, probably. So
The blow up doll.
blow up doll. I've done a guy wrestling an invisible wrestler, who I'm pretty sure didn't exist. Otherwise, he was super invisible because I couldn't see him. So yeah, why not? Why? You know what Ric Flair always used to say? You could have a good match with a broomstick. So I'm sure someone could have a good match with a rock.
All right. Well, just for context, there is a wrestler named Psycho Mike that indeed wrestled a Rock for over 15 minutes in a Tungsten Man match. That's an Iron Man match that lasts for 2 weeks.
Wow! And how many stars did that match get?
I don't think Dave Meltzer watched it, but from the viewers, 86 stars.
Okay, it's good. Yeah, pretty strong.
On a more serious note, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Oh man, I don't know. I just like doing what I do. So it's like I have moments all the time still where I'm like 16 years in, like I said, and I had a moment during Riot Cabaret, part of All In Weekend. We had a world title match in the main event. We had like Thunder Rosa come out for a surprise, like I said earlier, and then we had Michael Oku lost his world title in our main event, and just like 500 people just so emotionally invested in it. Just those kind of moments still give me goosebumps. And I think to be 16 years into a career and what you do still gives you goosebumps I'm aware that I'm very lucky, because I don't think many people in any walk of life have that with their career. And not just 16 years working in it, but as a fan, twice that, 32, 33 years. So to still be able to feel the same way sometimes about wrestling as I did when I first saw it as an 8-year-old kid on TV, or a 9-year-old in Wembley Stadium, is pretty cool. And I know not everyone in the world finds a passion like that they have. So I'm lucky to do what I do. And if I can keep doing that for another 5 years, and then another 5 after that, and then another 5 after that, then I'll be happy.
Hell yeah. And now, since we are nearing the conclusion of this interview, we are wrestling with the 8 questions of doom. This is our speed round, our bonus round, the round where we see who you really are. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Greatest wrestler of all time.
Oh man, that's like asking me to pick like my favorite song. Like, can I give you like 3?
Yes.
Because it depends on like what mood I'm in. Even this, I'd probably think afterwards that there's people I've missed off. But, I already said 2 of them: Bret Hart, Macho Man Randy Savage, and I would think The Rock, probably.
Okay. Worst wrestler.
Worst wrestler. Oh man, I don't know. I think the worst series of matches I ever saw especially when I was a kid, was like, remember Giant Gonzalez, who wrestled Undertaker at WrestleMania 9?
Yeah.
He was visually very impressive, obviously, but he was just one of those guys who'd obviously been hired because of what he looked like, and he just like, no disrespect to him, I'm sure he tried his hardest, but it didn't work. Like,
I will accept that answer. You're commentating on the main event of WrestleMania for the World Championship. Who are the two combatants?
Like, this is current?
Anybody. Anybody from past, present, future.
Do you know what? Like, I'll keep it current because otherwise I'll just give you the same answers as I just gave you, which would be Savage, Rock, Bret, Kurt Angle, those kind of guys. But I actually think that the past 2 years of WrestleMania main events, where it's been Cody and Roman, have been pretty special because I think that Cody is just the most naturally, he'd be a great heel as well, but he's the most naturally likable babyface because of the authenticity of his story and how he left and made his own way through the independent system, and then how he helped set up AEW and then came back to WWE, losing his dad. All that kind of stuff is an incredible story, and it's a real life story. And then Roman Reigns, I think, towards the second half of that run as the tribal chief up to WrestleMania 40, had probably become my favorite ever main event heel. So if Cody and Roman were to run it back a third time and I was somehow at the commentary desk, I think that would be right up there, because I think they're among the best babyface and the best heel combination in a big time match that I've ever seen.
Oh yeah. If you could come out to anyone's entrance music, past or present, who would it be?
Oh, Bobby Roode, the glorious thing. Glorious, I will be. Yeah, amazing. I sing that in the shower sometimes. It's incredible.
Finish the sentence. Kayfabe is.
Okay, so kayfabe is helping your audience to suspend their disbelief. So, interestingly, I interviewed Al Snow recently, who has, for Wrestle Talk magazine, and he has strong views on this. And what he's saying is, he says it's nonsense, this idea that like in the 70s and the 80s, that the audience thought wrestling was real and that wrestlers were keeping the truth secret by maintaining kayfabe. He said, and I think he's right, that like wrestling fans have always known, maybe not to the extent they do now, they didn't know the ins and outs of it, how everything worked, but they've always known that wrestling wasn't a legitimate fight, right?
Right.
In the same way they know when they're watching Star Wars that it's not a real story, like it's fictional, that it's happening in front of them. And so what Al Snow said to me is that what you're trying to do by maintaining kayfabe is you're helping the viewer to not be taken out of the moment, right? So they're trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're here to be entertained. So they're trying to make their brain believe in what they're watching and pretend it's real, because that's where the entertainment comes from. And so whatever you can do to help them with that illusion is keeping kayfabe. And it's not a question of lying to the audience. It's a question of respecting the audience, because you're just trying to help them be entertained.
Okay, that's a great answer. Squash, vegetable or fruit?
It's a vegetable, I think.
It is indeed a fruit.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, it has seeds, tomato logic.
Okay.
New Japan wrestler Taichi, his ring gear gets smaller every year, revealing more of himself to the world. My question, what is the appropriate trunks to butt cheek ratio for ring gear?
I'm going to give you, I realize that wasn't an entirely sensible question, but I'll give you a vaguely sensible answer, which is that I think in general, ring gear should, like everything else in your act, should accentuate the positives, right? So
Okay.
if you so if you have, I'm not saying you should show all your butt if you've got a great butt, but what I'm saying is like people who have great physiques, it makes sense for them to wear trunks, right? There's a reason why like older guys who come back for one like comeback match or something, and then find like and they're in their 40s and they haven't been working out, that they wear a t-shirt over the top because they don't want to be topless because they're not pleased with how their body looks. Like I can understand that. So I think there is something to that. I think fortunately we live in an age now where the aesthetics, like how people look, isn't quite as obsessive as it was in the 80s and 90s, but it is still a visual business to a point. You don't have to. There's lots of different body shapes and sizes that can work in wrestling, and I wouldn't want anyone to ever be self-conscious about what they look like. But again, that idea of helping the audience to suspend their disbelief does require people to have the body type that suits their character. So, for example, Mankind, right? Mick Foley didn't have a very athletic physique, but he didn't need to, because the character he was portraying, it wouldn't have made sense if he looked like Lex Luger. He needed to look the way he did for his character. So I think people should still, even in this day and age when there's much more variation in what kind of body types are considered acceptable in wrestling, and I think that's a good thing. But I think you just got to always be thinking, if you're a wrestler, in terms of character and what works for you.
Okay.
I know that was a sensible answer to a not sensible question. I'm sorry.
And the last question, the main event, the thing everybody wants to know. Have you ever had a conversation with a stranger in a supermarket about Darby Allin?
No. No. I don't know if I ever had a conversation with any stranger in any environment about Darby Allin. No, I haven't.
And that is the correct answer.
Okay, good.
And that will conclude this interview. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this with me.
Pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And can you tell us once again where we can find all things Dave Bradshaw on social media?
I think you know better than I do. It seems like you've scoured my Twitter, but my website is www.davebradshaw.tv, which is mostly, it's got like an old show reel on it and stuff, but it's particularly for any promotions who are interested in booking me. But for fans in particular, there's my social media, which is Twitter, I'm at Dave Bradshaw, and Instagram at Dave Bradshaw 83.
There's no Dave Bradshaw merchandise, right?
No, I feel like there should be. I don't know who would buy it except like my mum, but yeah, I feel like yeah, I've paid my dues, right? I've been in the industry 16 years. I should get a T-shirt or something.
Hell yeah! Fire up that Pro Wrestling Tees account.
Yeah, 100%.
And you don't have to type it into your Google machines. All of the links to all his social media will be in the description of the video below, but on YouTube and Castbox, simply click the link. A new tab will appear on whatever device you are on. You have no excuse. Give him a damn follow. Alright, of course, thank you for listening. If you like what we're doing, please like, subscribe, comment, but on YouTube and Castbox. This was sponsored by Rogue Energy and Player One Coffee. Join us every Tuesday and Wednesday for new incredible interviews, and follow the show at Wrestling with E, but on Xthread and Instagram for information on who we're interviewing, when we're interviewing, links to those interviews, and so much more. Follow me personally at JamesJ993. Alright, when I say wrestling with, you say entertainment, okay?
It's just me. I have to do this.
Yes.
Okay, let's do it.
For our very special guest, Dave Bradshaw, Calico Yacht, Scooter Dust, I'm James J, and this has been Wrestling with
Entertainment.
Hey folks, this is the Colossal Mike Law, and you are listening to Wrestling with Entertainment. Enjoy the show. Support these guys. We appreciate it very much. We'll see you at ringside.